Well, hello, everyone. I want to say a big welcome to all of you today because we are so fortunate to have Catherine Fox and Dr. Kirsten Ferguson both with us from Australia today, because we've all been reading Womenkind, which I read quite a few years back, but over the weekend I did a little bit of rereading. So it's great for you to be here. And I just wanted to say welcome, and let's go around. And Rania, I'd love for you to share where you are and what your roles are.
Rania, you're on mute.
Thank you, Andrea, and we're so fortunate to have you all with us today. I'm originally from Jordan and currently work and live in Qatar. I'm between jobs, so I will not mention where am I working now, but I have a PhD in education leadership, and I launched many initiatives to help educators to see their work differently and to enjoy what they're doing more and more. And we will hear more about it today. Thank you.
And Kristen, do you want to share where you are?
Sure. And just to comment on Rania's an amazing entrepreneur. When she said she started a few initiatives, many initiatives to help women across many different spaces. I'm Trisda Holwick, and I'm here bright and early in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And one of the questions I think in this book of celebrating women is, what do you do, and how, like, your role? And so I've been really thinking about that, because what do I do and what is my role? And I came up with a statement yesterday. One of my children asked me, and I said, I play with adults. So that's really in all sorts of different ways in education, but we play together, and I learn from and with other educators. And yeah, my passion too for women leadership is a strong one. So hence connecting with my friends here in the well-read community.
Yeah, and we all came together in Marrakesh in 2020, in January 2020. So that's where we all finally got to meet each other. And Rania put this idea together. So it's just been wonderful. Probably 4 times a year we get together and have a book, and always about either women in leadership or education, or the author was a woman. That we always want to celebrate women. So thanks so much. Kirsten, do you want to share your story?
Oh, well, we probably haven't got as long for the whole story, but I am on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. So coming to you from there, and very happily been living here for the last couple of years through COVID, and busily working on another book and doing lots of fascinating things around leadership. Leadership is definitely my area of interest as well. So it's great to be here tonight.
Thanks, Kirsten. And Catherine, love to hear your story, because I've heard it because I went to the book launch quite a few years ago, but I'd love you to share with everyone.
And I'm still doing pretty much what I was doing when we wrote the book, which is I'm a journalist and clearly an author, and I still do quite a lot of freelance journalism. But my special interest has been women and the workforce. So I've written about and advocated for change in that area for, just a few decades now. And continue to do so. Not a very rosy picture in Australia at the moment. We're having, it's been a year of, somebody described it the other day, a cultural reckoning. So we've had a few scandals, particularly in our parliament in Canberra, but also some really poor statistics coming out around the number of women in leadership and so on. So there's a lot still to be done. The good news is, I think, and the book really captured something that we like to think was slightly ahead of its time, that a lot of women are coming together at the moment, rallying, catching up with each other, marching in the streets and so on for change. So that's where I am at the moment, trying to push that along as much as I can.
Thanks, Catherine. And I'm Andrea. I'm in Sydney, New South Wales. And I think a lot of the work that really pushed me into this area was the Renaissance Women. When I was at Winona School, and Dr. Bryony Scott and Nicole Arch had started the Renaissance Women, where I was fortunate to ask Kirsten to come and speak to all of the women there where we brought educators together from all different sectors who were either aspiring leaders or inspiring leaders, just to network, talk, and we also had a keynote speaker to share information. So that's where something I love to do is support other women and hopefully inspire people as well. So let's get started on the book. Can you tell us a little bit, Kirsten, about where it all sort of generated from for you so that we can share?
Yeah, of course. And, you know, unlike Catherine, who has been advocating for women and I think came out of the womb a feminist, I'm very much a late onset feminist. So I had spent most of my career keeping my head under the radar. I didn't want to be known as a female anything, a woman in leadership. I would run from networking events. I was really conditioned through having come through the military and other very male-dominated environments that to succeed, you just fitted in and, you know, you didn't want to call attention to yourself. And so the fact that I've even written a book called WomensKind and ran a campaign called Celebrating Women still amazes me as much as, you know, anyone else who knew me during that period. But it all came about because I got pissed off and I got annoyed with seeing how women were treated online and were facing denigration just for having a view online. And I guess I've always been very optimistic and wanted to see if I could find a way to, you know, create my newsfeed to just be that bit more positive. And so I came up with a harebrained idea off the cuff and definitely did not think or plan or strategize what this campaign would look like. And I rang my mum and asked her 4 questions, which formed the basis for the whole campaign. And she had no idea what I was doing. And I took her answers and asked her to give me some photos and shared them on my Twitter feed. And I didn't tell anyone she was my mum, but I noticed that people were just interested. And she's no one in particular. She's a retired nurse and was studying herself at the time, but people were just interested in her story. And so that led me to decide that I was going to see if I could celebrate 2 women every single day from all walks of life and from anywhere in the world for a year. And that's what began Celebrating Women. And it certainly became much, much bigger than I ever anticipated. And by the end of the year, I had celebrated 757 women from 37 countries around the world. And, you know, it was just the most rewarding year of my career. And at some point during that crazy year, I was invited to write about it. And Catherine and I knew each other, and I was in awe of Catherine's writing and her scholarship around women in leadership. So, you know, to be able to have that thrill of celebrating other women for a year, but then to be able to really dive into it with someone like Catherine was, you know, just such a joy. So I love the fact that Catherine, you and I are still talking about this a few years later. It's like the campaign that just continues to have ripple effects. And there was lots of spin-off campaigns. So there's lots of women in different industries, women in different countries. Yeah, it's really, really exciting. Oh, that's a lovely photo, Andrea, from the book launch in Sydney. And yeah, they're the 4 questions. So the first one was actually the one you've got there last. I would ask people, you know, how is it, or how would you describe what it is that you do? And you weren't allowed to use a position title, or, you know, you couldn't say you're a CEO. You had to actually find a way to describe it. And that's not that easy, but I did it because I genuinely didn't know when I asked my mum how she would describe herself. And accidentally that became probably one of the key things that made it an inclusive campaign, because women participated who were staying at home with their kids or retired, or I had cleaners, but also government ministers. So it really didn't matter. And then what did you want to do at school? 3 words to describe your life and who you hope to inspire and why. And honestly, I can't emphasize enough that those 4 questions were made up while I was on the phone to my mum walking along the beach. And yet it's incredible the amount you can tell from someone, you know, when you ask them to just give you a sentence or 2 on each of those.
But they're questions that make you really think. Like, they look like simple questions, but I went back to the blog post I wrote 5 years ago and I'm thinking, have I changed? What's changed? you know, are my 3 words the same? And it's interesting because when I coach people, I say, what has this process in 3? Can you use 3 words to describe the process of coaching? And it's interesting because it takes a long time to determine which 3 words, even though they're only 3.
Yeah, and my dad, who was a great supporter of this throughout, he's obviously very proud of his daughter, but he, I didn't realize that he'd been tracking all of the 3 words, graphing it, typical dad sort of thing, and then created a bit of a word cloud at the end. And there was a lot of commonality even across all those countries and all those different types of women. And challenging, I think, was the most common, and then rewarding very closely. So, you know, and that describes so many of our lives, and perhaps those words don't change. But the inspiration, who you hope to inspire, that really became the question, where you could sense a lot of the struggles women had gone through. So you might have someone who says they want to inspire other victims of domestic violence, or they want to support other people living with autism, or whatever it might be that, you know, they've really had to grapple with. So it was just, yeah, it was a beautiful campaign, and it continues, as I said, to have an impact for me, but also for the women. Just last week, I received a message, as I often do, from one of the 700 and odd women, and she said that she had just been named on one of our government honour rolls in one of the states in Australia, and that she puts it down to having first found her voice through celebrating women, which, you know, I find incredible. But because of just this small aspect of celebrating someone who might not otherwise have had a voice or been considered a role model, it gave this woman and many others confidence to go on to do other things. And, you know, maybe I burst into tears when I got her note, because it's just so remarkable and wonderful.
Rania, what did you think when you started reading this book? Because I just love the way that you brought in the stories with so much information. I thought that was brilliantly done, because, you know, if you're just given a whole lot of information, but then you tied it to the stories, which brought it that real personal touch to it.
Oh, that's Catherine. Catherine's the skillful author who I was like in an apprenticeship with Catherine, I can assure you.
Catherine, do you want to share? Was that?
Oh, sorry, I jumped in on Rania, so I'm sorry, Rania.
Fine. If you like us to hear from Catherine, and then I will respond to that.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I'm a journalist, so that's what you do. You know, you convey information, but obviously telling a story is important. I'm a business journalist by background, actually. So I worked at the daily financial newspaper in Australia for 23 years. So, but I did a lot of feature writing. So I would interview, you know, CEOs, executives, you know, thinkers sometimes, which was much more interesting. And you have to tell a story if you want to convey ideas and so on. So I think that I think Kirsten's being a little modest there. She has a really natural storytelling bent, and the whole Celebrating Women campaign was clearly about a series of fantastic stories, rich stories, and it was the richness of those lives that was just fascinating, wasn't it? Because these women, not only were they eclectic and from countries around the world and from different classes, cultural backgrounds, but all of them had such fascinating things that they'd done in their lives. And I don't think any life is just bland, but I do think there's something about being a woman in so many cultures that presents so many challenges that you just, a lot of women that were in the campaign had set out to do something and couldn't do it. So, you know, either couldn't get the education or couldn't qualify or whatever, and had to find other avenues and so on. So there's this real sort of layered nature to what they'd done and what they'd achieved. So when Kirsten mentioned the word challenging, you know, I was just thinking challenging the last 2 years, anyone? But and what we know now, of course, is that women have borne the brunt of the pandemic, certainly in this country, but I know the data is similar elsewhere. So, you know, it's really tough. And I think women are just remarkably strong. And that came through as well. Strong and sort of outward looking. So I think that the storytelling actually was sort of there. It was just pulling all of that together.
So I think I will start with my comments and feelings. First of all, I really appreciate and recognize kind of efforts when you write a book with another person, because I have done this with my colleague, and despite all the struggles and you can write a book about how you wrote a book. So that's another story by itself, and I really appreciate how you combine both of your strengths together. It was interesting and surprising because, like, we have an assumption how it's going to be written, but sharing that your team, Kristen, was you and your laptop was just amazing. And it was also so inspiring. You touched my heart when you started telling that you started with the story from your mother. That's another thing by itself, because we sometimes go and keep asking other people's, but we don't spend some time with people around us, starting from our mothers, grandmothers, or aunt, or whatever. And those stories would help us to grow and really be who we are going to be. So there are lots of things behind this book, but every single step, celebrating women, giving them spaces, and allowing us to see them within their stories, not only as numbers. Apologies for this, because sometimes when we hear within the newspapers or the news or everything around us, they would give a statistic, like we have 25 students, we have 50 teachers, but we forget that we have this person with all their dreams, their challenges, their stories, and we just keep focused on the outcomes, the KPIs, or the strategic planning that they want us to do. And when Andrea, you told us to prepare for those questions, oh my God, that was another.
Tell us more.
So reading it in the books and just let me drink a little bit.
Okay, no problem. Do you want to keep the screen up, or do you want to have a conversation? You want to keep those questions up?
So reading it in the book, I've kept asking myself, interesting, how would I just express that? But when Andrea told us that we will be answering those questions, and within this discussion, oh my God, I was running to my children, to my friend, to my husband. What do you think the best 3 words would be? And their answers were another story by itself. So my husband gave me, like, I'm revolutionary. And that was something, like, interesting. My youngest daughter, she told me that I'm joyful. And I thought that's, hey, something, nice to think about. If I would think about who I wanted to inspire, or personally, I would love to help or to unleash the potential within everyone that is around us. Because sometimes they think that this is their maximum, but that's not the case. And when you see the sparkles in their eyes, it's very rewarding. See the learning process and how they're trying something else and getting a little bit out of their comfort zone. So this is really inspiring for everyone, even for me. What am I doing at the moment? I'm trying to be kind of a role model in a way, to have this kind of effective or different version of how women, mainly in the Middle East or within the region, especially with underrepresented areas, that they have stereotypes about how we can do things, or even for men, and to do it with joy, to do it and you're enjoying what you're doing and you're celebrating despite the challenges and things that we're having. And I think this learning process for me and for the people around me is encouraging in a way. Lots of reflections and lots of things that we need to think about. My daughter talked about research, because I love research, but also research and practitioners. So I loved how they were familiar with the things and they helped me, in trying to highlight or focus. So that was another story by itself, Andrea. Thank you. And thank you, Christine, Catherine, for this.
Rania, can I reassure you that pretty much every single woman I spoke to for Celebrating Women said, I can't possibly participate, I can't answer those questions, I've done nothing with celebrating, and Andrea, you being one of those women. So that tells us a lot about how women perceive, what they've done. But I'm interested, you mentioned what your husband and children said. What are your 3 words to describe your life to date?
I pretty much agree with what they have been describing, but I would just add one word, which is passion. Regardless of everything that we're doing, I love to focus on enjoying and really linking it to my purpose, regardless if other people would see it kind of revolutionary or something out of the box or whatever you will name it. But I would just see that I'm following my passion and doing something that I enjoy.
It's great.
Kristen's laughing.
I just know your
Beautiful.
dedication, passion, purposeful, all of those words come to mind when I think of you, Rania.
Thank you.
You're
Drew's
right,
done.
Kristen. I was just going to say how amazing it is to hear that, Kristen, and I can't believe you got to read, 753, did you say?
757. And
Um,
honestly, every time they were amazing. It wouldn't matter what the woman was doing or anything. Every story was inspiring.
Yeah, and I think that's what really stood out for me. So I love, there's so much I loved about this book. I didn't know about it. So I'm grateful to Andrea for helping direct us. I wasn't on Twitter when Celebrating Women was a moment. And I can't help but think as I was reading it about our current climate here in Canada, for sure. I have some real concerns about what's happening in social media for women leaders, especially in politics. Some of my friends and some of my the people I really admire, just how horrible it has been here. And like, so the climate, as I was reading, I'm like, wow, that was an amazing campaign, but why are we still in this space? And so it was, with a heavy heart that I was also reading this and thinking about, what changes can happen. And so the stories, the interweaving of the stories was helpful because I hadn't been there for the Celebrating Women. So being able to see some of those words and keeping that narrative, because it was really at the heart is all these stories. So I'm very grateful to both of you for anchoring in the research, pulling in what we know, but also how it is perceived and shared by the women. So that was really great. I was really fascinated around the queen bee section, and there's some guilt around that as I was reading, that yes, this feels familiar. And it was a really great pause to think about, the queen bee myth, that it's a myth, yet it's something that I have thought about and wondered, but it's actually people, leaders are people, and sometimes they're going to be like supportive and sometimes they're not. It really doesn't matter if it's a woman or a man leader, it could be, but I seem to have fixated on a couple of incidences. And so I found that very helpful to be really unpacking what's going on. And I think very much about the net, the key elements. And it was really funny. I was talking to my partner about the book, what I really liked. And then I turned it over and read the back, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's all in the back. So I probably should dig a little deeper, but whoever wrote your final piece pulled out some of the things I was really thinking about. But that idea of knotted ladder, that it's a net that we want to be pulling other women up. And I think when I look at what I want to do and who I inspire is really around that net and other people coming up, and how do we provide space for people to not necessarily follow a linear path. So when I think about my words, it definitely is something that's a little bit more outside the box, is a word I would use, creative or innovative and entrepreneurial, but also really passionate and purposeful. So like Rania, a lot of those elements I share, which is probably why we get along so well. And then the question of like, what is it that we do and how are we defined by what we do? And is that what we are defined by? Yet it's the question that most people ask. So I'm really digging into that when it comes to women. But yeah, so lots to talk about, and definitely want your perspective on current climate. Are you seeing the same in Australia, globally? How do you feel about that, knowing this is a very powerful campaign and ... So yeah, I'd love to open it up to your comments on that.
I'm going to, Catherine is the expert in current climate, but I did just want to make a comment that, Celebrating Women was never intended as a fix it campaign. It was just like a moment in time that had unintended consequences, because it did have this collective sense of women coming together. And I think we talk in the book about there was no trolling as well, which is extraordinary given what I was, writing about women, and, Twitter couldn't get their head around that either. So it definitely had a place, but, Time's Up followed very soon after, and the whole collectivism of women, I think that was one of its sort of early, when Catherine said before its time, I think that was perhaps a real just sort of starting, but it was never going to fix, unfortunately, these systemic issues. But Catherine's really our expert, so I'm now going to hand over to Catherine for your perspective on, the current climate.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, I'm talking more specifically about Australia, but my feeling is that there are themes that are really common, certainly to somewhere like Canada, the UK, the US, because they're not, they're different cultures. There's different pressures. But my observation would be the Me Too movement did have a big impact, and I think social media. I mean, Kirsten and I often said, isn't it funny that this is an environment that can be, horribly toxic for women, social media, but at the same time has been enabling. So, and, that's actually often the case with new forms of media. And in fact, there's often those alarmist, oh gosh, we've got social media now, we won't need traditional media. Well, of course, actually, they often blend and we have morphing and different sort of versions. But I think the thing particularly about something like Twitter, so I use a lot of social media. I don't spend nearly as much time on Twitter as perhaps I used to. I still find it a very good information source, but I think that there is a cohort who do use Twitter a lot, and I think there is a lot of abuse there, which is, is awful, and a lot of it is men abusing women, particularly women who have opinions, as Kirsten pointed out. So that's, I think, classic stereotyping, men getting upset, irritated by women sort of perhaps being perceived as moving beyond what they're meant to be doing, which is, not voicing opinions, not being strong or assertive. And that's something that I find ironic in the kind of the workplace discussion. It's always like, you women need more confidence. And I think, oh, really? Because the last time I checked, a lot of men in Australian business did not react well to confident women. So we get a lot of, there's a whole lot of contradictions around this stuff. I heard it the other day, there was a big report on women in media in Australia, both the number of women who are being quoted in mainstream news reporting and the number of women working in the media here. And neither of those figures is particularly good. I mean, it's grown a little bit, but not tremendously. And even at the moment in COVID, where many of our chief health officers are women, so we have a number of leading epidemiologists in this country, women still not being quoted at the same rate as men. So it's like we're not seen as experts or, having expertise. And we also saw the really unedifying, we had the unedifying experience of not having a woman prime minister being unedifying, but the reaction to her in this country. And a documentary recently came out showing that, and cataloguing, not that long ago. It's less than 10 years since Julia Gillard was our Prime Minister. And it's been interesting, and Kirsten, I don't know if you picked this up, but a lot of younger women watched that documentary and were appalled. They could not believe the abuse that she had attracted. It was savage, it was revolting, and it was normalised very quickly, a little bit like what happened to Hillary Clinton. So I think that for a whole lot of those reasons, and we could go on talking about this for a long time, I think that we still struggle in our societies to see women as leaders. I think we have a very masculine idea of leadership. I think that's reflected in our media. I think those stories you mentioned, the Queen Bee, goodness, I have heard that for years. Kirsten and I were just saying, every time someone says, oh, I had a woman boss and she was nasty. And you go, have you had a male boss who was nasty? And they, oh, yeah, I can tell you I had many more nasty male bosses than I had nasty women bosses, not just because of the statistics. As you say, it's about people and reacting under pressure and so on. But we very readily tell those stories to each other and through culture, pop culture, a whole lot of things, you know, the nasty, the mean girls stuff. So that was actually, I found that really fascinating to unpack some of that. And we found that that's resonated with a lot of people who've read the book. So, yeah, I think sometimes I have good days where I think, I am basically an optimist. I wouldn't do this if I wasn't. But I do think we're going through a bit of a cycle at the moment. And I think it's been exacerbated by the economic slowdown and the disruption of the pandemic. So we ricocheted back to very, very traditional models. Who should be the primary earner? Who should be the primary carer? And a lot of that, I think, is playing out at the moment. But I think the viciousness online reflects some of that real tension about who has the right to be running things, making decisions, you know, really fundamental things in our communities, in our families, communities, and in our societies and businesses. So, yeah, still in a state of flux, I think.
I would also comment, it's not only about those societies you mentioned, you know, like United States, Australia. I would highlight that it's also within our region. And I think Tristan and I worked in a book with other colleagues, and we're highlighting that motherhood is part of leadership, because we can't ignore the role that she plays within the family or then with the people surrounding her. So, yep, very much for that. Andrea, you didn't answer those questions. Are you going to?
Yeah, we're excited. Yeah, especially after the fact that you didn't submit when the campaign was launched. So we'd love to have a moment for you to share now with us.
Well, I actually felt at the time I didn't feel I had anything to contribute. And then I was seeing all these people. I'm like, actually, after the event, I probably could have. But, you know, you see some people and there is that little bit of intimidation because you're thinking, oh, my gosh, there were so many wonderful people there. But I was going back and I'm thinking the three words: curious, collaborative, and connecting. I love to connect other people to their strengths. I like to do things like that. I think I like to unlock the potential of others. And I've been thinking that goes with any role I go to, whether it's coaching or teaching or whatever. I'm thinking it's more like the stream that goes through the roles, because I've had different roles all the time. I haven't stayed in the one career. So it's that unlocking the potential or seeing the best in others and then trying to put a light on that or shine that a little bit. But yeah, I was going to be a ballet choreographer when I was a child. And then, I did ballet for many, many years. And then I got offered the hairdressing apprenticeship and I finished school early, year 10. And I didn't go to university until the age of 30. And it was only because my husband said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a teacher. And he said, well, go and do it. And I said, I'm not smart enough. And he said, yes, you are. And I said, I have to go through all of this thing to get into university, which I sat all these exams and I got in. But if I waited another year, I wouldn't have got in because of the certain levels that you have to get into the university. But then when I was there, Dean's award every time, Dean's list every year, because I loved it. If you're passionate about something, I think it carries you through. So, you know, I know that they all say you have to have a certain level of, you know, ATARs or scores to get into university, but I think passion has a lot to do with it as well. So, yeah. So,
and
that's me.
It's interesting. You sort of took a circuitous route to do what you wanted to do. There was definitely a real theme that came through from the women when they were asked what they wanted to do at school. Probably, I reckon, about a third were like the ones that said, I wanted to be a doctor and I am a doctor. You know, they knew what they wanted to do and then that's what they've gone on to do. There's another third like you that got there eventually, but childcare and, you know, getting married early or being a single mum or whatever, it took them a more circuitous route to get to. And then I reckon there was a good third of women that were prevented from doing what they wanted to do by the expectations or the views of others, that they weren't smart enough or that they needed to stay at home with the kids or that they just weren't good enough to do it. It was really interesting. So I'm glad you got to do what it was you wanted to do eventually. And my mum's story was the same. Like, I learned she, I think in her answer to her question was she wanted to work at the pound when she was at school because she liked animals. But she left school in year 10 as well and did her secretarial typing course because that's what you were expected to do back then. and she's now got a PhD, but it took her whole life, you know, to get there in a very circuitous way.
And I was just thinking before when we were talking about, I'm thinking, is it Australia has that tall poppy syndrome? You know, when somebody, and I'm thinking you can't make that excuse. You can't have that for women. And we also have the imposter syndrome for women as well. So I'm wondering, how do we build or take that away? How can we support more women so they don't feel like they've got that imposter syndrome? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll let Catherine jump in on that. I think she's got views on that.
I hear this a lot, and I think obviously it's important we support women. But I always think that we focus too much on women in this area. But bear me out. We say, how can we ensure that? How do we educate women? How do we give them? How do we make sure, in fact, that we have a society that it supports and encourages women, rather than telling women that they have to fix themselves up and go forth and fight the battle? I don't think we'll ever fix anything until we look at the root causes and address them. Lack of confidence, and by the way, there's no data around this. It's one of those areas that everyone talks about. Oh no, women don't have confidence. Well, what are we measuring? What do we mean by confidence? I mean, Kirsten and I know loads of women who are very, very clear about what their skills are. They deliver, they're good at what they do. I would call them confident. They're not alpha male behaving people. So I think we've got to be a bit careful about this. But if we are looking at behaviour patterns, so maybe I didn't put my hand up in the meeting, why not? Why, as a woman who's probably quite accomplished, didn't you do that? Well, often the case is women think, what's the point? I've seen what happens. Women get, penalised for being a bit assertive and so on. So again, we're talking about symptoms often, not cause. And I think if we're going to change this, it's not about giving women an injection with a bit of that extra DNA bit of confidence or telling them to be more this or that. I think we've got to look at our workplaces. We've got to look at our social norms and make sure that actually when women make an effort and so on, it's valued in the same way that men's is. So I think we've got a lot more work to be doing around those really big systemic issues. And I know that sounds very airy-fairy, but actually we spend far too long looking at supply instead of demand. And I talk to a lot of businesses and I just say, don't send women off to more confidence building classes. You should be talking to everyone in your workplace about being truly diverse and truly inclusive and making sure we actually measure what people do and that we appropriately recognise and reward them. Stop telling women that it's their fault and they need to be more bolshy, because actually the reason they're not is usually because they get beaten up for being like that, which is why I had a real problem. And Kirsten and I discussed this a bit, the whole lean in movement I found curiously naive. I just thought, where has Sheryl Sandberg been all these years when all this scholarship and research has been going on about gender dynamics and the barriers for women in many workplaces? And it seemed like she'd just suddenly woken up one day and thought, oh, there's a problem here, and then told women to lean in. Not that simple. Just absolutely not that simple. And I think, unfortunately, probably did more harm than good, which is a bit of a shame. I'm not suggesting her intentions weren't good. I think they probably were. But yeah, so that's my feeling, is that we've taken the sort of the default position to nag women, to wag a finger at them, tell them to be more confident, more assertive, more risk-taking. Actually, there's nothing to tell us that women can't be like that. And in fact, research says most women up until their early 20s have exactly the same levels of confidence and ambition and so on as their male peers. It's
create the environment more than
it's the environment. Right? Exactly. Yeah.
And it's how we're seeing each other, is not only about ourselves. And I think this is how we ended last time's discussion when we were discussing Burnout, the book. And we said that, did anyone write any book for men? How are they going to deal with their burnout or, their feelings? Or we're only targeting, just highlighting. And I think we need to have kind of a list. We have tall poppy syndrome, imposter syndrome, whatever syndrome. And then we're saying women, women, women. So we might have a long list of all the syndromes and symptoms that we're addressing. One of the things that also resonated from the book, I liked when you highlighted how the idea of the campaign had come up when you were relaxed on a summer holiday. And I think we all should start reflecting on when do we have good ideas and how can we increase those kind of moments more and more. So there are lots of things in between the books. It's something that it's really inspiring and powerful. Kristen, Andrea.
I love that, Rania, that idea of the space to think, space to respond. Great pickup on that too, because you're right. You know, and the burnout piece, right, of the continually moving forward, we don't provide space for ourselves and for others to think. And I just wanted to pick up too on Catherine. I think Lean In got some pushback on lean into what? What are we leaning into? And is this kind of where we want to be? And is that for all women or white women in particular? You know, like I think there were some definite spaces, and as a white woman, you know, I definitely feel that it's a different experience for me and my experience going through the world as a leader and the space, and having opportunities as well with education. And so, you know, whenever I do think about these questions, but that space piece is so interesting, Rania. The great ideas that come, but also you acted on it, Kristen. I like to think I have a lot of great ideas, but it's the next phase that how do we continue those kinds of movements? So that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I have thought about that a lot myself, because it was having space. And I now live on the beach where I came up with that idea, and I keep like, okay, vibes, come back. What's the next? I'm here now. Where's the next idea? But obviously you have to still your mind. But I think the other thing to remember on the acting on it is that I didn't think about it. And there's something to be said and I am a planner, and I normally would be thinking, okay, I'm going to do this campaign, and I'm going to need to make sure I cover off on this and this, and I'll need to do this, this, and this. And I probably would have outthought my idea and decided it was all too much work or too hard, or I'm going to make a fool of myself or something. Yet I didn't. I just acted. And I do think there's something in that as well, when, you know, you feel passionate about something, to not try and overthink it. And especially if your intent is good. And I knew with this campaign, you know, I didn't seek anything. I wasn't seeking a book. I had no intent other than to just share some stories. And so that in and of itself, I think almost guaranteed that it was going to go okay. You know, my fears were around trolling and stuff like that. But I definitely think it was a success because I didn't plan. It was a long year, let me tell you. I had not anticipated it would be like a whole nother job for a year of posting these profiles every single day. But it was, you know, well and truly worth every moment.
I do think about current context and this sense of languishing in the pandemic right now, like in that space. And one more thing is not, you know, it's just unfathomable at the moment. Like one foot in front, and I wonder that impact, because it is who's bearing the brunt of this. Who's exhausted, who's just trying to move forward. I mean, I think we all are, but and just keeps going. We got new travel restrictions today from, you know, Canada, and it just feels again, you know, oh wow, you know, we're still here, and we're still moving in this unknown territory and space. And so when there are people that are stepping up to try to make some change, and I mean, I think the climate context right now is one that absolutely needs to be considered, and such pushback. There's a lot of women doing this work, but it seems like it's almost double-edged a little bit in the response. Like, it's not just the issue of climate, it's the who is speaking about it that seems to be what I'm picking up on, especially in the Canadian context, with pushback. So that's something on my mind at the moment.
Can I piggyback on two things that Kirsten said? Because that reading that again reminded me. And so this, probably about 6 months ago, I rang a friend, he's in Hong Kong, and I just said, I'm struggling with this as a research student. And we had a conversation. I went, I'm so fortunate to be able to pick up the phone and just speak to you about something. So I created Connect the Dots, where I've asked people, and it was, if I waited 6 months, I wouldn't have done it. And I just thought there's a little bit of a need there, because you're so isolated when you're doing your research. How can we support and learn from those who've come before us? So but you go, if I don't do it now, it won't happen. Can this make a little bit of a difference to someone? I was just thinking, if I can support somebody else through this process. So that was one thing I was thinking on the weekend. I think being in the moment, so your expectations, you don't overthink things, they just come to you in the need, right? So that was one thing that really resonated with me while rereading this. So I think it's great that you just went with it. But the support, you had the support as well, do you feel?
Well, no. Oh, I didn't know I would have support. No, I mean, I just
from the people, like I've asked people, and I was just surprised at how many people have provided the stories.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It got I had to ask. So initially, obviously, no one knew what I was doing, and so it all grew by word of mouth. And the first sort of 10 people, I probably was more direct in saying, "Please, can you fill out this? Can you send me some answers?" But that's really all it took. I didn't have to do much. There was a lot of support early on, and I think it's because of how inclusive it was. So no woman that got in touch didn't make on the list. I had to end up closing the list a few months before the end of the year, because there was so many, and I was thinking, I can't possibly keep going on this. And I'd always said it would just be a year, and I really believed that it needed to be handed on, to other people to take with it and run with whatever they want to do. And in fact, it's worth mentioning, I'm always embarrassed almost the number of women who have come and said, "Oh, can I use the hashtag celebrating women?" And it's like, it's not mine to give, it's all of ours. And of course, and use all the questions, do whatever you want, but this is our story. I just happen to be a guardian of this particular campaign for a year, but it's very much gone well beyond anything I ever anticipated, which is wonderful.
Well, that was my second thing, was that, sorry, Rania, was the hashtag. Do you think it was the collective space and all the people that sort of stopped the trolling? I was just thinking, was it the hashtag that sort of protected the collective?
Thought about that a lot and spoken with her. I think it was because the women being celebrated were your neighbours, your mothers, your sisters, the secretary at work. They, for the trolls out there, it wasn't high profile. There were some high profile women, but they were by far in the minority. And all I can think is that it was such a positive campaign. You'd really have to be digging low to criticise, a lady who cleans motels in Queensland, for example. So I think there was something about the type of the women that we were celebrating. And if there was ever any criticism, and I can't even think, I think there was, one or two times someone might have said something, I would notice the whole community would come in and sort that out. Yeah, so it just didn't happen. And I think that's a testament to show that you can create a safe space. And it's ironic, given it started because it was an unsafe place for women online. If there is any success, that's come from it, is for that moment we did create a safe place for women to celebrate one another, and to have men allow space for women's voices to be heard.
Yeah,
Rania?
It's interesting. While I was reading, I was thinking how many teachers' profiles you had over there, or are we going, to launch another campaign to hear from teachers or educators in specific from out of their profiles, just to share and celebrate those kind of things?
You should do that, Rania. You should do that. That's
5-year
always my
anniversary.
answer. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let's stay around here. Let's go for it. And I found it interesting because it's very much, similar to Women Ed. It's a hashtag, and also how they started and combined each other. And now we're part of this, and we're here discussing a book and chatting about it. I can't personally thank you enough for all the inspiring information and lots of things that we can start working on, and also for us as women to start reconsidering things from around us.
Thank you. Rania, do you want to share the PowerPoint with the casting of the net? Because I took that and I put that on Twitter, and I had so many people on the slide. Rania, do you want to share that slide? That one, I just think that speaks to me. Forget the ladder,
Yeah.
cast your net wide, and bring
Well,
other women up with you.
if you have a look at my Instagram tonight, I've got a tile that just says "forget the damn ladder." So I get more to the point. But it's the same idea. Yeah, I mean, it really is. When you think about the ladder, it's a ridiculous analogy. Whoever came up with it, obviously only one person can fit on it at a time, and you hold on for dear life so no one can get past. Whereas the net, we can all hold the sides.
It's the lateral and horizontal kind of
Yeah.
comparison too, right? And or what are we climbing up to?
Oh, yeah. And you
Working
still
with.
hear, you definitely still hear it though, drop the ladder down for others, climbing the ladder, the glass ceiling, we climb the ladder towards it. Just, I think we need to get rid of the damn ladder.
Toss it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us, and all the people who are joining or watch this later on the recording. I want to thank Trista and Kirsten and Catherine and Rania, the inspiration behind it and giving it momentum every few months. So thank you so much for that. Our next book is going to be Julia Baird's Phosphorescence. So we're going to be looking at that, reading that, which is great for me because I've already read it. And so I can spend more time on my research over the holidays and with my family and just go back into it and have a look and remember. So thank you so much, everyone.
It's been
Who'd like to
great.
say
Thank
anything?
you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Enjoy your read. Yeah.
Thank you.
Catherine.
Thanks, Kath. Catherine, have you got yours?
We
There
need to
we
get a
go.
photo.
Yeah, I'll do that. Wait a minute.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop recording. And thank you, everyone.
There you go. Done again.
Recording still on.